Chapter 10. The hours that followed seemed the longest I had ever known. I went to bed, but wore a thick dressing gown so I could jump up and take an active part in anything that happened. My heart beat quickly with excitement. 1 o'clock, and nothing. Wait, what was that? Feet running along the corridor. Then my cabin door opened suddenly, and a man almost fell inside.
"Save me," he said breathlessly. "They are hunting me."
A cabin does not have many hiding places for a 6-foot man, but it was not a moment for argument. I could hear footsteps outside. I pointed, and he slipped down under the bed. As he disappeared, I pulled down the folding wash basin. A lady who was about to wash her face could not possibly be hiding a man she had never met before. There was a knock at the door, and before I could say, "Come in," it was pushed open. I think I expected it to be Mr. Paget or the Reverend Chichester with a gun. I did not expect a respectable night stewardess with a concerned face.
"Sorry, miss. I thought you called out."
"No, I did not."
"I apologize for interrupting, but there is a man wandering about who is drunk, and we are afraid he might get into one of the ladies' cabins and frighten them."
"How terrible," I said, looking worried.
"He won't come in here, will he?" "Oh, I don't think so, miss. Ring the bell if he does. Good night."
"Good night." Drunk. So that was the explanation. "Come out immediately," I demanded. There was no answer. I looked under the bed. My visitor seemed to be asleep. Very drunk, I thought. Then I saw something frightening. Blood on the floor. Using all my strength, I pulled the man out. He had been stabbed in the left shoulder. There was a large cut made by a knife. I took his coat off and began to work. At the shock of the cold water, his head moved. Then he sat up. "Stay still, please," I told him. He pulled himself up and stood, unsteady on his feet.
"I don't need anything."
He was angry, refusing my help without any thanks. "That is a deep cut. You must let me bandage it."
"No."
Now I became angry. "I do not like your manners," I said coldly.
"Then I will leave."
He moved towards the door, but almost fell. I pushed him down on the sofa. "Don't be a fool. Do you want to bleed all over the ship?" He finally listened to me and sat quietly as I bandaged the wound. "There," I said. "Now, will you tell me what happened?"
"I will not."
"Why not?" I said. He answered angrily.
"If you want to tell everyone, tell a woman. Otherwise, keep your mouth shut."
"How dare you!" I cried. He got up, and we faced each other like wild animals. For the first time, I noticed the details of his appearance. The short, dark hair, the strong jaw, the scar on the brown cheek, the light grey eyes that looked into mine in a way that was wild and dangerous and very hard to describe. I could not look away. "You have not thanked me yet for saving your life," I said softly. That hit him hard. I knew it would. Somehow I knew that he would hate more than anything else to be reminded he owed his life to me. I didn't care. I wanted to hurt him. I had never wanted to hurt anyone so much.
"I wish you had not saved me," he shouted. "I would be better dead."
You cannot avoid the debt, I said. I saved your life, and I'm waiting for you to say thank you. If looks could kill, I think he would have killed me then. He pushed past me. At the door he turned.
"I accept the debt. One day I will pay it."
He was gone, leaving me with my heart beating so very fast. Chapter 11. I got up late the next morning. Mrs. Blair called me as I came on deck. "Good morning, gypsy girl. Sit down here next to me." "Why do you call me that?" I asked as I sat down. "It suits you. It's the gypsy in you that makes you so different. I decided from the beginning that you and Colonel Race were the two most interesting people on the ship." "That's funny," I said. "I thought the same about you, only that is much easier to understand." Mrs. Blair laughed, and I knew we would get on well together. "Tell me about yourself, Anne. Why are you going to South Africa?" I told her about Papa's work. "So you are Charles Bedingfeld's daughter. I knew you were more than a simple country girl. Are you going to Broken Hill to dig up more bones?" "I may," I said carefully. "I've got other plans as well." "What a mysterious girl you are. But you look tired this morning. Did you not sleep well?" She yawned. "A fool of a steward woke me in the middle of the night to return that film I dropped yesterday. He did it in the most silly way. He put his arm through the air ventilator and dropped it on me. I thought it was a bomb for a moment." "Here is your colonel," I said, as Colonel Race appeared on the deck. "He's not my colonel. In fact, he admires you very much, so don't run off." "I need something from my cabin," I said, and left quietly. For some reason, I was a little afraid of Colonel Race. I went down to my cabin to find something to stop the wind blowing my hair about. But as soon as I opened my drawer, I knew it had been searched. I sat down, my head full of questions. Since the previous night, I had been wondering who the young man in my cabin was, and who had stabbed him. And now this. Who had done it? What were they looking for? Why should cabin number 17 be so important? I counted the people I thought I should watch. Sir Eustace Pedler, Mr. Paget, the cruel-looking secretary, and a conversation with Mr. Chichester would be a good idea, I decided. Tying a scarf round my hair, I went up on deck again, determined to look for answers. I was in luck. Mr. Chichester was leaning against the rail, drinking tea. "I hope you have forgiven me about cabin 17, I said with my best smile.
"I believe in forgiveness,"
said Mr. Chichester coldly. "Is this your first visit to South Africa?" I asked.
"Yes, but I have worked for the last 2 years amongst the cannibals in East Africa."
"Man-eaters? How exciting! How did you escape?"
"Escape?"
"From being eaten, I mean." Mr. Chichester was not amused, but if he had spent the last 2 years in Africa, why was he not suntanned? His skin was as pink as a baby's. After lunch, I found Sir Eustace and Paget having coffee with Mrs. Blair and Colonel Race. Mrs. Blair welcomed me with a smile, so I joined them. "But I love the Italians," Mrs. Blair was saying. "They're so helpful. You ask for directions, and they take you kindly by the arm and walk all the way there with you."
"Was that your experience in Florence, Paget?"
asked Sir Eustace with a smile. His secretary's face became pink, and he had difficulty speaking.
"Oh, yes, yes."
With a quick excuse, he got up and left.
"I am beginning to believe Paget has committed some secret crime in Florence," remarked Sir Eustace. "Whenever Italy is mentioned, he changes the subject or runs off."
"Perhaps he murdered someone," said Mrs. Blair. "I hope I am not hurting your feelings, Sir Eustace, but he does look like a murderer."
"Yes, it is amusing when you think of how very respectable the poor man is."
Chapter 12. Extract from the Diary of Sir Eustace Pedlar.
After we left Madeira, Guy Paget would not stop talking about work. It is true I promised my publishers my memories in the summer, but who wants to work on a ship? And Paget is too honest for the job. He won't let me invent stories about people I have not met. The next thing I knew, he was trying to get an extra cabin. "There's no room to work in your cabin, Sir Eustace. It's full of luggage, and we could hardly work in my little hole." I know Paget's little holes. He usually has the best cabin on the ship. The answer seemed simple. "Get an extra cabin," I said. But Paget loves to make mysteries. He came to me the next day, very pleased to have troubles to share. "You know you told me to get cabin 17 for an office. I tell you, Sir Eustace, there is something very odd about that cabin. He and Mr. Chichester and a girl called Bedingfeld had almost had a fight over the cabin. Needless to say, the girl had won, and Paget was annoyed. "Both number 13 and 28 are better cabins," he repeated. "But they would not look at them." "Well," I said, trying not to yawn, "nor would you." He was not happy to hear that. "You told me to get cabin 17. "My dear fellow," I said rather sharply, "I mentioned number 17 because I happened to notice it was empty. I did not mean you to fight to the death for it. Number 13 or 28 would have been just as suitable." He looked hurt. "There is something more. Miss Bedingfeld got the cabin, but this morning I saw Chichester coming out of it." I looked at him severely. "If you are trying to start an ugly story about Chichester, who is a reverend, though an unpleasant person, and that attractive girl, Anne Bedingfeld—" "I don't believe a word of it," I said coldly. "Anne Bedingfeld is an extremely nice girl, with particularly good legs. In fact, she's got the best legs on board." Paget did not like me talking about Anne Bedingfeld's legs. He never notices legs, and thinks my enjoyment of such things is childish. I like annoying Paget, so I continued happily. Ask her to dine at our table tomorrow night. It's the fancy dress dance. We'll have the captain, the girl with the nice legs, Mrs. Blair. You won't get Mrs. Blair without Colonel Race, Paget interrupted. He's asked her to dine with him. Paget always knows everything. I was most annoyed. Who is Race? I demanded. As I said before, Paget always knows everything, or thinks he does. He looked mysterious again. They say he works for the British government, in the Secret Service, Sir Eustace. Rather an important man, too. Isn't that like the government? I cried out. Here's a man on board who works with secrets, and they give them to me. A peaceful outsider, who only asks to be left alone.
Chapter 13.
At the fancy dress dance, I had great fun dressed as a teddy bear, and won first prize. Anne Bedingfeld had dressed as a gypsy, and looked extremely attractive. I danced twice with Anne, once with Mrs. Blair, and various other pretty girls. Then we went to supper. I ordered champagne, and this made the usually silent Colonel Race talk in a very relaxed way. This amused me, until I saw that Colonel Race, and not myself, was getting all the attention. "You must have had a very interesting life, Colonel Race," said Miss Bedingfeld, looking at him with wide eyes. That was enough. Race began to tell lion stories. A man who has shot lions in large quantities has an unfair advantage over other men. It seemed to me that it was time I, too, told a lion story. That reminds me of an exciting story I heard. A friend of mine was out on a shooting trip in East Africa. One night, he came out of his tent and was surprised by a growl. He turned and saw a lion about to jump. He dropped to his knees, and the lion jumped right over him. Annoyed at having missed him, the animal growled and prepared to jump again. Again, my friend dropped down, and again the lion jumped over him. This happened a third time, but by now he was close to his tent, and he ran in to get his gun. When he came out, gun in hand, the lion had disappeared. Surprised, he went carefully round to the back of the tent. There, sure enough, was the lion, busily practicing low jumps. This was received with great delight and a lot of laughter. "I must go to Rhodesia," said Mrs. Blair as I drank champagne. "After your stories, Colonel Race, I simply must. It's a terrible journey, though. 5 days from Cape Town in the train." "Please be my guest," I said. "I have a private railway carriage joining the train, which will be more comfortable." "Oh, Sir Eustace, how kind of you! Only a week, and we arrive in South Africa." "Ah, South Africa," I said happily. I drank more champagne. South Africa, with her gold mines and her diamonds. Diamonds, said Mrs. Blair, delighted. Diamonds, said Miss Bedingfeld. I suppose you have been to Kimberley and seen the mines, Colonel Race. Lots of questions followed. What were mines like? Was it true that the native workers were kept inside fences in special huts that were really the same thing as prisons? Race showed a good knowledge of his subject. He described where the native people lived and how they were searched for diamonds, and the safety measures used by the great diamond company De Beers. Then it's impossible to steal the diamonds? Asked Mrs. Blair with much disappointment. Nothing is impossible, Mrs. Blair. It happened once, just before the war. You must remember it, Pedlar. You were in South Africa at the time. I nodded. Oh, do tell us, cried Miss Bedingfeld. Race smiled. I suppose you have heard of Sir Lawrence Eardsley, who made a fortune from South African gold mines. He comes into the story because of his son. You may remember that before the war there were rumours that diamonds had been discovered in British Guiana, a discovery as large as the one at Kimberley. 2 young explorers returned from that part of South America, bringing with them an impressive collection of diamonds. These 2 young men, John Eardsley and his friend Harry Lucas, came to Kimberley so their diamonds could be inspected. At the same time, a robbery took place at De Beers that was hard to believe. Let me explain. When diamonds are sent to England, they are made up into packets. These are locked in a safe. 2 keys are kept by 2 different men, and a third man knows the combination number needed to open the safe. The packets are handed by De Beers to their bank, and the bank sends them to England. Each package is worth £100,000. On this occasion, the bank thought there was something unusual about one of the packets. It was opened, and lumps of sugar were found inside. I don't know exactly how they came to believe the thief was John Eardsley. Some people remembered that he had been very wild at Cambridge, and that his father had paid his debts more than once. Anyway, the story soon spread that the discovery of South American diamonds had been a lie. John Eardsley was arrested, and some of the De Beers diamonds were found in his possession. But his father, Sir Lawrence Eardsley, paid De Beers for the missing diamonds, and the case never came to court. How the robbery was committed has never been known. As for the 2 friends, they joined the army, fought bravely in the war. John was killed, and young Lucas was reported missing, believed killed. Sir Lawrence died about a month ago, and his fortune passed to his closest relative. The Colonel paused, and, as questions came quickly, something caught Miss Bedingfeld's attention. She turned in her chair. at the sound she made, I too turned. There was Rayburn, standing in the doorway, his face showing every sign of shock. Evidently, Race's story had affected him very much. Suddenly, he saw that we were watching him and left immediately. "Who is that?" asked Anne Bedingfeld. "My other secretary," I explained. "Mr. Rayburn. He's been seasick up to now." "How long has he been your secretary?" she asked. "I employed him just before I sailed. An old friend suggested him." She said nothing, but sat in thoughtful silence. I turned to Race with a particular interest in his story. "Who is Sir Lawrence's closest relative, Race? Do you know?" "I am," he replied with a smile.
Chapter 14. Anne's Story. I decided the time had come to share my story. I sat on my bed, still in my party dress, and thought about Mrs. Blair. I liked her. She had been kind to me, and I knew my story would interest her. She would not be in bed yet, and the night stewardess would know her cabin. I rang the bell. After some delay, it was answered by a man. Mrs. Blair's cabin was number 71. "Where is the night stewardess, then?" I asked.
"There is no stewardess working at night, miss."
"But a stewardess came the other night, about 1 o'clock.
"You must have been dreaming, miss. There's no stewardess after 10.
So who had come to my cabin on the night of the 22nd? I was certainly dealing with well-organized people. I left my cabin and knocked at Mrs. Blair's door. "Who's that?" "It's me, Anne Bedingfeld." "Oh, come in, gypsy girl." I entered. Mrs. Blair was wearing a lovely Japanese silk robe, all orange, gold and black. "Mrs. Blair," I said quickly, "I want to tell you my story. That is, if it isn't too late." "Not a bit. I always hate going to bed." She smiled in that delightful way of hers. "I would love to hear your story. You are a most unusual creature, Anne. Sit down next to me and begin." I told her the whole story, from Papa dying to the death in the tube station, the murder at Sir Eustace Pedlar's house, and the man in the brown suit, and now my adventures on the boat. She gave a deep sigh when I had finished, but she did not say at all what I expected. "Anne, haven't you ever had doubts?" "Doubts?" I asked, confused. "Yes, doubts. Starting off alone with almost no money. What will you do in a strange country with all your money gone?" "It's no good worrying about that until it happens. I've still got most of the £25 Mrs. Fleming gave me, and I won the ship's lottery yesterday. That's another £15. Why, I have lots of money. £40. Lots of money. My goodness," said Mrs. Blair. "I could not do it, Anne, and I have plenty of strength. I could not start off with a few pounds and no idea where I was going." "But that's the fun of it," I cried excitedly. "It gives me such a grand feeling of adventure." Then she smiled. Lucky Anne. There are not many people who feel as you do. I could not wait any longer. Well, what do you think of it all, Mrs. Blair? I think it's the most thrilling thing I ever heard. But first, will you stop calling me Mrs. Blair? Suzanne will be much better. Is that agreed? I would love it, Suzanne. Good girl. Now, you recognized Sir Eustace's secretary, not Paget, the other one, as the man who was stabbed and came into your cabin for shelter? I nodded. But this stewardess is rather strange. As soon as you told me about her, I had an idea. Are you sure she wasn't a man? She was very tall, I admitted, and I did think her face was familiar. Suzanne got a piece of paper and began to draw with quick confidence. There, the Reverend Edward Chichester. Now for the rest. She finished and passed the paper to me. Is that your stewardess? Why, yes, I cried. How clever of you. From the moment I saw him, I thought Chichester was no good. And he tried to get cabin 17, I answered quickly. Yes, but what does it all mean? What should have happened at 1 o'clock in cabin 17? It can't be the stabbing of the secretary. It must have been some kind of appointment. Rayburn was on his way to meet someone when he was stabbed. But who was the appointment with? Certainly not with you. We both sat, silent for a minute or two. Then Suzanne came up with another idea. Is it possible something was hidden in the cabin? That would explain why my cabin was searched the next morning. Was someone looking for your piece of paper? But it was only a time and a date, and they were both past by then. Suzanne nodded. No, it wasn't the paper, but I'd rather like to see it. I had brought it with me and gave it to her. She studied it closely. There's a dot after the 17. Why not a dot after the 1, too? There's a space, I pointed out. Yes, but... She held the paper close under the light. Anne, that isn't a dot. That's a weak spot in the paper, you see? Just go by the spaces. I read out the numbers as now I saw them. 1, 71, 22. You see, said Suzanne, it's 1 o'clock still, and the 22nd, but it's cabin 71. My cabin. We were so pleased with our discovery, and so excited. Then suddenly I had a very different thought. But this isn't your cabin, is it, Suzanne? No, the purser moved me into it. I wonder if it was reserved by someone who did not board the ship. Could we find out? We don't need to, cried Suzanne. The purser told me. The cabin had been booked for Madame Nadina, a celebrated Russian dancer. She has never appeared in London, but she is loved in Paris. She was a great success there during the war. A thoroughly bad woman, I believe, but very attractive. The purser told me how sorry he was that she wasn't on board. Then Colonel Race told me that there was some odd stories about her in Paris, that she might have been mixed up in espionage. I think that is why Colonel Race was in Paris. He's told me some very interesting things. There was a large gang of international criminals whose leader, a man called the Colonel, was thought to be an Englishman. He was very clever. When they committed a crime, the colonel made sure the police had the evidence to arrest somebody who was innocent. This woman was supposed to work for him, but nobody could prove it. Yes, Nadina is just the woman to be involved in this business. The appointment on the morning of the 22nd was with her in this cabin. But where is she? Why didn't she sail? And suddenly I knew. Because she was dead, I said. Suzanne, Nadina was the woman murdered at Marlow. My thoughts went back to that room where I had found the roll of film. And why did I connect that thought with Suzanne? Suddenly, I held her arms and almost shook her in my excitement. The film that was dropped through the ventilator, that was on the 22nd. The one I lost? Why would anyone return it to you that way, in the middle of the night? It's a mad idea. No, the film had been taken out of the tin and something else put inside. Have you still got it? Here it is. I put it next to my bed. She passed it to me. It was the usual round tin container. I took it with a shaking hand, but even as I did so, my heart jumped. It was much heavier than it should have been. I pulled off the lid, and a stream of glassy stones rolled onto the bed. Stones, I said, disappointed. Stones? Cried Suzanne. No, Anne, not stones. Diamonds. Chapter 15. Diamonds. Are you sure, Suzanne? Oh, yes, my dear. I've seen rough diamonds before. This is what diamonds look like when they are taken from the ground. It's only after they have been cut and polished that they become the glittering beauties we love. And these are excellent diamonds. I think there's a story behind them. The story we heard tonight, I cried. Colonel Race's story. It can't be a coincidence. He told it for a reason. To see its effect, you mean? I nodded. Who is Colonel Race? That's a good question, said Suzanne. He's well known as a big game hunter and often travels to Africa. But this is the first time I have met him. There's a general idea that he does Secret Service work. I don't know if it's true. I have two more questions. How is Colonel Race involved in this business? And what became of the other young man? Not Aidsley, Lucas, the one who disappeared during the war. We only know he was missing in action. It was never confirmed that he was dead. We have some answers, Suzanne said. We know that these people want the diamonds. That's why the man in the brown suit killed Nadina. He did not kill her, I said quickly. Of course he killed her. Who else could have done so? I don't know, but he didn't kill her. He went into the house 3 minutes after her, then came out looking as if he'd seen a ghost. Because he found her dead. But nobody else went in. Then the murderer got in another way. There was no need for him to walk past the lodge. He could have climbed over the wall. Suzanne looked at me. The man in the brown suit, she said thoughtfully. He was the doctor in the tube, and he followed the woman to Marlow. But what did he do when he left Marlow? I said nothing. Nadina was murdered in Sir Eustace Pedlar's house, and it was his secretary, Rayburn, who was stabbed and came into your cabin to hide. 2 connections. I wonder, Is it possible that the doctor had some control over Sir Eustace? That he made Sir Eustace bring him as his secretary so he could get out of England safely? That in fact Rayburn is the man in the brown suit? Rayburn's got a scar, I know, but a scar can easily be created with makeup. He's the right height. I think he had already read the paper that he dropped. He saw the dot as you did, so he tried to reach cabin 17 at 1 o'clock on the 22nd. On the way there, somebody stabbed him. Who? Chichester. Yes, it all fits. Send a telegram to Lord Naseby to say you have found the man in the brown suit, and you will make your fortune, Anne. I felt myself shaking. Suzanne's eyes searched mine. Then she said gently, "It will save time and trouble if you tell me all about it." "I'm not ashamed," I said slowly. "It's something that just happened. You can't be ashamed of that. He was rude and ungrateful, but I think I understand why. It's like a dog that's been badly treated. It will bite anybody. That's what he was like, bitter and angry. I don't know why I care, but I do. Just seeing him has turned my whole life upside down. I love him. I want him, and I will make him love me. I'd die for him. There, now you know." Suzanne looked at me for a long time. "I've never met anybody who was so practical and so passionate at the same time," she said at last. "So, you will not send a telegram to Lord Naseby?" I shook my head. "And you believe Rayburn is innocent?" "Yes, and I also believe that innocent people can have a rope put around their neck and be hanged until they are dead. But, dear Anne, face the facts. Despite all you say, he may have murdered this woman." "No," I said, "he did not. He might have followed her there with the idea of killing her, but not with a rope. Never. Taking a rope meant it was a planned and cold-blooded murder. Rayburn is not that type of man. If he had killed her, he would have strangled her with his hands. It would have been a crime of passion." Suzanne gave a little shiver. She said with approval, "Anne, I'm beginning to see why you find this young man of yours so attractive." Chapter 16. The next morning, using some of my money, I persuaded the night steward to talk. On the previous voyage from Cape Town to England, one of the passengers had paid him to drop a roll of film into a lady's cabin when the ship made its return journey to Cape Town. It was just a harmless joke. The film was to be dropped through the ventilator into cabin 71 at 1 a.m. on January the 22nd. He had not been told the lady's name, so he had no reason to think Mrs. Blair was not the right lady. The name of the passenger who paid him was Carton, the man killed on the tube. So, one mystery was now answered. As we came nearer to Cape Town, I considered my plans. There were so many people I wanted to watch. Mr. Chichester, Sir Eustace and his secretary, and Colonel Race. How could I do it? On our last evening, we were sitting on deck when Sir Eustace asked his secretary some simple question about railway delays in Italy. Mr. Paget gave the same sort of nervous answer I had noticed before. When Sir Eustace asked Mrs. Blair to dance, I quickly moved to the chair next to the secretary. I have always wanted to go to Florence. Did you enjoy your visit?
Indeed I did, Miss Bedingfeld. I'm sorry, I must go and deal with some work.
I put my hand on his arm. Oh, but you never seem to want to talk about Florence, Mr. Paget. I believe you have a guilty secret. I felt him jump.
Not at all, Miss Bedingfeld. I would be delighted to talk, but there really are some letters.
Oh, Mr. Paget, Florence on the banks of the Arno, a beautiful river. And do you remember the Duomo?
Of course.
Another beautiful river, I said, when in fact the Duomo was the cathedral church of Florence.
Yes, certainly.
Mr. Paget had never been in Florence in his life. But if not in Florence, where had he been? In England? At the time of the Mill House murder? I decided to test that possibility. The strange thing is, I said, that I thought I had seen you before, but I must be mistaken, since you were in Florence at the time. There was a hunted look in his eyes. Yet I thought I saw you at Marlow. Hardly able to speak, Mr. Paget got up and ran. That night I went to Suzanne's cabin, full of excitement. You see, I said as I finished my story, Paget was in Marlow at the time of the murder. Are you so sure now that the man in the brown suit is guilty? I'm sure of one thing, Suzanne said. You have made an important discovery. Now we know Paget does not have an alibi. Exactly. So we must watch him. As well as everybody else, she said. Well, I wanted to talk to you about that. And about finance. No, don't be proud. Please be practical. We are partners. I would not give you money just because I liked you. What I want is excitement, and I am prepared to pay for it. We are in this together. To begin with, you will come with me to the Mount Nelson Hotel. I shall pay, and we will make our plans. It was late, after midnight, but I felt too excited to go to bed. It was my last night on board. I went up on deck. The air was fresh and cool. The decks were dark and empty. I leaned over the rail, watching the white water that the passage of the ship left behind. Ahead was Africa, a wonderful world. I stood, lost in a dream. Suddenly, I had a strong feeling of danger. As I turned, a hand went round my throat. I couldn't make a sound. I fought with all my strength. Hardly able to breathe, I hit out at the shadowy form of the man who was trying to throw me into the sea. Then another man came running and knocked my enemy down onto the deck with one punch. I fell back against the rail, sick and shaking. My protector turned quickly to me.
You're hurt.
It was Rayburn, the man I loved. There was something savage in his voice, a terrible threat against the person who had hurt me. Quick as a flash, our fallen enemy was up and running. Rayburn went after him, and I followed. Round we went to the other side. There the man lay, with Rayburn bending over him. Did you hit him again? I asked.
There was no need. I found him like this.
Rayburn lit a match. I am not sure which one of us was more surprised. It was Guy Paget.
Paget?
Rayburn was clearly shocked.
I never suspected.
He turned to me.
And you? Where do you fit in this? How much do you know?
I smiled. A lot, Mr. Lucas. He caught my arm painfully.
Where did you get that name?
Isn't it yours? I asked. Or do you prefer to be called the man in the brown suit? That shook him. He let me go and fell back a step.
Are you a girl or a witch?
He said quietly. I am a friend. I stepped towards him. I offered you my help once. I offer it again. Will you have it? His anger shocked me.
No, I'll have nothing to do with you or any woman.
Again, he made me angry. Perhaps, I said, you don't understand how much you are in my power. He came forward quickly.
And do you understand that I could take you by the throat like this?
I felt his hands close around my throat and press, ever so gently,
and crush the life out of you, and then throw your body into the sea. What do you say to that?
I laughed. I loved the feeling of his hands on my throat. I would not have exchanged that moment for any moment in my life. With a short laugh, he let me go.
What's your name?
Anne Bedingfeld.
Does nothing frighten you, Anne?
Oh, yes, I said, with a calmness I didn't feel. Wasps. He gave the same short laugh as before. Then he pushed Paget with his foot.
What shall we do with this rubbish? Throw it overboard?
If you like, I answered.
I admire your strong feelings, but we will leave him. Goodbye, Miss Bedingfeld.
Until we meet again, Mr. Lucas. Again he was shocked. He came nearer.
Why do you say that?
Because, I said with certainty, we will meet again. I stepped back. I heard him start after me, then pause, and a word came through the darkness. I think it was witch. Chapter 17. Extract from the diary of Sir Eustace Pedler, Mount Nelson Hotel, Cape Town.
To begin with, where is Rayburn? We have not seen him since we arrived in Cape Town. To make everything worse, Guy Paget decided to have a fight on the last night on the ship. He has a lump the size of an egg on his head. The whole thing is very annoying. One of my secretaries has disappeared, and the other looks like a bad boxer. I can't take him out with me. Everybody in Cape Town would laugh at me. He's a madman. I am in a very bad temper. I had a terrible breakfast with terrible people. Dutch waitresses with thick ankles who took half an hour to bring me a bad bit of bacon. And a very serious thing has happened. I went to my appointment with the Prime Minister, taking Mulray's letter. It looked perfectly normal, but inside was a blank sheet of paper. Now I'm in real trouble. And Paget, helpfully reminding me what went wrong, makes it worse. However, in the end, I had to listen to him. Remember, Sir Eustace, Mr. Mylrea did not give you anything formal. You accepted Rayburn because of what he said about himself. You think Rayburn is a criminal, then? I said slowly. Paget did. My idea was to do nothing. A man who has been made to look a fool is not keen to broadcast the fact. But Paget hurried to the police station, then sent telegrams. We got Mylrea's answer that evening. He knew nothing about Rayburn. Paget is now full of bright ideas. He believes that Rayburn is the famous man in the brown suit. He is probably right. He usually is. But all this is getting unpleasant. The sooner I go to Rhodesia, the better. I have explained to Paget that he will not be coming with me. My dear fellow, I said, you know what Rayburn looks like, so you must stay here to identify him for the police. Besides, I cannot go about with a secretary who appears to have been fighting in the street. Looking as if he had just eaten a lemon, Paget remained focused on his work. Your private carriage will be joined to the 11 o'clock train tomorrow morning. But what will you do about a secretary, Sir Eustace? There's Miss Bedingfeld, I said thoughtfully. I will offer her a job. Paget was against this idea. He does not like Anne Bedingfeld. Ever since the night of the lump on the head, he has shown uncontrolled emotion whenever she is mentioned. Just to annoy him, I shall ask her. As I said before, she has extremely nice legs.
Chapter 18. Anne's Story. I will never forget my first sight of Table Mountain. I got up early and went out on deck as we came into the bay. There were white clouds above Table Mountain, and below, all the way down to the sea, was the town, golden and magical in the morning sunlight. I heard a quiet footstep behind me, and knew who it was. Then his voice came, pleasant and normal.
Miss Bedingfeld, I want to apologize. I behaved very badly last night.
I turned. It was a strange night, I said.
Will you forgive me?
I held out my hand, and he took it.
You are mixed up in a dangerous business, Miss Bedingfeld. I want to warn you. Leave it alone. These men will do anything. They are murderers. Look at last night.
I know, but why are you warning me? He said quietly.
It may be the last thing I can do for you. Once I am off this ship, I will be all right. But I may not get off this ship.
What? I cried.
I'm afraid you are not the only person on board who knows I am the man in the brown suit.
If you think I told anybody, I said angrily. He smiled.
I trust you, Miss Bedingfeld. If I ever said I did not, I lied. But there is one person on board who has always known. If he speaks, I am finished. But I'm going to gamble. I am going to take a risk that he will stay silent.
What makes you think you can win?
Because if the police get me, I will be no more use to him. If I am free, I might be. Well, in an hour I will know.
He held my hand hard. For a minute, his eyes seemed to burn into mine. Then he turned and left. I did not enjoy the next 2 hours of formalities. Not until I was on land and all the passengers had got off the ship and no arrest had been made did I breathe easily again. Then I realized that it was a day filled with sunshine. Cape Town was beautiful. The sun, the air, the flowers. I was delighted. The Mount Nelson Hotel had given me a room next to Suzanne's, with a lovely view of Table Bay. But we did not take time to admire it. We went straight down to breakfast. "Did you see Sir Eustace?" I asked Suzanne afterwards in private. "He was marching out of the breakfast room as we went in. He'd had a bad meal and was telling the waiter what he thought about it." Suzanne smiled.
And did you see Mr. Paget, Anne? He's got a lump on his head. What has he been doing?
"He's been trying to push me into the sea," I replied, and gave her the details. Suzanne was having lunch with friends that morning, and they came to the hotel at 11 to collect her. I was left to entertain myself. I went through the grounds of the hotel and followed a cool, shady street until I came to the main road. I walked around, enjoying the sunlight and a market full of flowers and fruit. When I returned to the hotel, I found, to my surprise and pleasure, a note from a Mr. Ruffini, the curator of the Cape Town Museum. He had read in the newspaper that I would be arriving on the Kilmorden. I was described as the daughter of Professor Bedingfeld. He had known and admired my father, and his wife would like to invite me to tea with them that afternoon at their house. I set off after lunch and followed his directions. The train to Meisenberg, where the curator lived, travelled slowly around Table Mountain for half an hour, and when it stopped, I was facing the sea again. There was some very exciting bathing here. The people had short, curved boards and came floating in on the waves. It was too early to go to tea, so I went to the bathing pavilion to hire a bathing suit and towel. They asked if I wanted a surfboard. "Yes, please," I said. Surfing looks easy. It is not. By accident, I got a good ride on my board and came out delighted and determined to return on the first opportunity. The curator's house was high up on the mountain. I rang the bell, and a smiling local boy answered it. "Mrs. Ruffini?" I inquired. He welcomed me in, led me along a hall, and opened a door. For a moment I paused in sudden doubt. As I went inside, the door shut sharply behind me. A man got up from his seat behind a table.
"Miss Bedingfeld, here you are, and here you stay."
I had made a fool of myself. I was in the hands of the enemy. Chapter 19. Everything Rayburn had said that morning came back to me very unpleasantly. I did my best to be brave. I was invited here by the curator of the museum. If I have made a mistake—"
"A mistake? Yes, a big mistake."
His laugh was ugly. He was a tall Dutchman with a red beard. "My friends know where I have gone," I said. "If I have not returned by this evening, they will come in search of me."
"Which friends?"
I thought quickly. "Mrs. Blair, for one," I said.
"I don't think so."
He shook his head.
"You have not seen her since 11 this morning, and you received our note at lunchtime."
His words showed how closely I had been followed, but I was not going to give in. "You are very clever," I said. "Perhaps you have heard of the telephone? Mrs. Blair phoned when I was resting in my room after lunch. I told her where I was going." I was pleased to see this worried him.
"Enough! Tomorrow you have questions to answer, and we will make you talk."
He called, and 2 men came and took me upstairs into a dusty attic room under the roof. First, they tied a piece of material tightly over my mouth. Then they tied me with a rope until I could hardly move. I turned and twisted, but I could not get loose or call for help. At last I fainted or fell asleep. When I woke, it was dark. The moon was high in the sky and shining down through a small window in the roof. I could hardly breathe through the cloth, and I was in terrible pain from being tied up for so long. Then I saw something in the corner, a bit of broken glass shining in the moonlight. My arms and legs were helpless, but I could still roll. Slowly, I began to move. It was painful, but I reached the glass. Even then, it took a long time to cut through the rope around my wrists. Once my hands had lost their stiffness, I was able to undo the cloth and then the rest of the rope. But it was some time before I could stand. I went quietly to the door and looked out. Silence. The moonlight through a window showed me the staircase. I went down it as quietly as I could. Halfway, I heard the faint sound of voices. With great care, I went on down to the hall. Then I stopped still. A servant boy was sitting by the hall door, but he was asleep. Should I go on? The voices came from the room I had been in. One was the Dutchman. The other seemed familiar, too. I had to risk waking the boy up. I crossed the hall without a sound, knelt by the door, and looked through the keyhole. There was the big Dutchman. The other speaker was Mr. Chichester.
"It is dangerous. What if her friends come after her?"
the Dutchman said.
"Nonsense," Chichester answered. "They have no idea where she is. Anyway, it's the Colonel's order."
The Colonel! This was the dangerous criminal Suzanne had told me about.
"Why not kill her?"
the Dutchman asked.
"I would," said Chichester. "But the Colonel wants information from this girl."
The diamonds, I thought to myself.
"Well," continued Chichester, "give me the lists."
For a long time, they seemed to talk only about large quantities of vegetables, dates, prices, and places, which I did not understand. It was half an hour before they finished.
"Good," said Chichester, standing up. "I will take these for the Colonel."
Quick as a flash, I was across the hall and outside. I ran down the street as if my life depended on it. Chapter 20. At the hotel, Suzanne was so happy when I returned safely that she held me tightly. "Anne, my dear, I've been so worried. What have you been doing?" "Having adventures," I replied. When I had finished telling my story, she asked one question. "What are we going to do now?" We started with a large breakfast for me. Colonel Race joined us with a strange expression on his face.
"Have you heard? It seems that the famous man in the brown suit was on the boat with us."
"What?" I cried. I felt suddenly faint.
"He fooled Pedlar into taking him as his secretary. Rayburn, he called himself."
"Have they arrested him?" asked Suzanne. Under the table she held my hand.
"No, he's disappeared."
"What does Sir Eustace think of it?" The chance to hear Sir Eustace's views on the matter came soon enough. The poor man was in a very sad condition. Encouraged by Suzanne's sympathy, he told us his many troubles.
"First, a strange woman has the bad manners to get herself murdered in my house. Why my house? Why, of all the houses in Great Britain, did they choose the Mill House? What harm have I ever done the woman that she got herself murdered there?"
Suzanne made one of her sympathetic noises, and Sir Eustace continued.
"And, if that's not enough, the man who murdered her does something even worse. He makes himself my secretary. I tell you, I am tired of secretaries. Either they're secret murderers, or they have fights. Have you seen the lump on Paget's head? Of course you have. How can I go about with a secretary like that? I am finished with secretaries, unless I have a nice girl, with bright eyes, who will hold my hand when I'm feeling angry. What about you, Miss Anne? Will you take the job?"
"How often will I have to hold your hand?" I asked, laughing.
"All day long," replied Sir Eustace.
"I could not get much work done then," I reminded him.
"That's all right. All this work is Paget's idea. I am happy to be leaving him behind in Cape Town."
"He is staying here?"
"Yes, he'll enjoy himself chasing after Rayburn. But what about my offer? Remember, there are lots of lions in Rhodesia. You will like lions. All girls do."
"Will they be practicing low jumps?" I asked, laughing. "No, thank you, Sir Eustace." Sir Eustace smiled at me, sighed deeply, then opened the door to the next room and called to Paget.
"Paget, could you go to the trade office and ask them for a woman to take to Rhodesia? She must have bright eyes, and not object if I hold her hand."
Then Sir Eustace turned back to me.
"I am serious, you know, Miss Anne. Will you come? Mrs. Blair will be your chaperone, and you can have a holiday to dig for bones."
"Thank you very much, Sir Eustace. I will." Chapter 21. Extract from the Diary of Sir Eustace Pedlar.
Paget got a secretary for me, a woman called Miss Pettigrew. I have never seen a woman with such a hard face. She must be nearly 40, wears old-fashioned glasses, and sensible boots, and she is so organized she will drive me mad. At the moment, I am travelling to Rhodesia with a group of women. Race goes off with the two best-looking, of course, and leaves me with the one with sensible boots. And this is my private carriage, not Race's. All afternoon, Anne Bedingfeld has been looking out of the window with Race, admiring the beauty of the Hex River Valley. Perhaps she is afraid of Miss Pettigrew. I don't blame her. There is nothing attractive about Miss Pettigrew. She is a frightening female with large feet, more like a man than a woman. I am going to stop working on my memories. Instead, I shall write a short article. Secretaries I have had. 1. A murderer running from justice. 2. The man who has done something bad in Italy. 3. Miss Pettigrew, who, I have no doubt, is really a dangerous criminal. Probably one of Paget's Italian friends. I am sure that one day the world will find out that Paget has been making fools of us all. I went to join the women, expecting to be welcomed happily, but they were both fascinated by one of Race's traveller's stories. I think I should call this carriage not Sir Eustace Pedlar and Party, but Colonel Race and Harem. I'm glad we came up here in daylight, cried Anne Bedingfeld. It was a wonderful sight. There were great mountains all around us, through which the train turned and twisted upwards. "Is this the best train in the day to Rhodesia?" asked Anne. "In the day?" laughed Race. "My dear Miss Anne, there are only 3 trains a week. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. We won't arrive at Victoria Falls until next Saturday." "How long are you going to stay at the Falls, Sir Eustace?" Mrs. Blair asked. "That depends on what is happening in Johannesburg," I said. "In England, I pretend to be an expert on South African politics, but from what I hear, Johannesburg will be a very unpleasant place to visit in about a week's time. I don't want to find out what life is like in a revolution." Thursday night. We have just left Kimberley, and Anne Bedingfeld has told us a surprising secret. It seems that she is in fact a reporter working for a newspaper. She sent a long telegram from Daar this morning. All the time she has been looking for the man in the brown suit. She did not know who he was on the Kilmorden. In fact, she hardly had the chance to find out. But she's now very busy reporting. How I travelled out with the murderer, and inventing stories of what he said to me, etc. I know how these things are done. I do them myself in my memories. She's clever, though. She has discovered the name of the woman who was killed in my house. A Russian dancer called Nadina. The police believe that Rayburn might have been on Monday's train for Rhodesia. They contacted people all along the line, and nobody of his description was found. But that doesn't mean a lot. He's a clever young man, and he knows Africa. He has probably changed himself into an old native woman. Anyway, Anne Bedingfeld is looking for him. She wants the fame of discovering him for herself and the Daily Budget. Young women are very cold-blooded nowadays. I suggested to her that it was an unwomanly action. She laughed and told me that if she found him, she would make her fortune. Tomorrow we shall be going through Bechuanaland. The dust will be terrible. Also, at every station, little native children come and try to sell wooden animals that they make themselves. I am rather afraid that Mrs. Blair may lose control of herself. There is a strange attraction about these toys that may make her unable to refuse them. Friday evening. As I feared, Mrs. Blair and Anne have bought 49 wooden animals.